Have you ever walked into a room and felt like you didn't exist? You were there, fully, generously offering your energy, your presence, your care, and yet it was as if no one truly noticed. Not the real you. Not the one silently hoping to be seen beyond the roles you play, the tasks you perform, the smiles you wear. There's a pain that isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It hides behind functioning, behind responsibility, behind doing everything right. And yet, it cuts deeply. It's the ache of not being appreciated, not for what you give, but for who you are. This is not about vanity. It's about emotional survival. Psychologist and physician Dr. Gabor Maté has spent decades studying how emotional neglect, even in subtle forms, leaves lasting marks. He says, the greatest stress we can experience is the stress of disconnection from ourselves and from others. And disconnection doesn't always look like loneliness. Sometimes it looks like a marriage where you haven't felt truly seen in years, or a job where you're the reliable one, but never the valued one, or a family where you're the glue, and yet somehow invisible. This kind of invisibility often starts early. As children, many of us learn to survive by pleasing, adapting, staying quiet. We believed that if we were good enough, helpful enough, selfless enough, someone would finally notice. Someone would say, "You matter." But what happens when that moment never comes? What happens when you're 45, 52, 63 and still waiting? This video is not about blaming others. It's about reclaiming your self-worth from the inside out. Because the truth is painful, but powerful. Waiting to be appreciated can become a life sentence, but choosing to value yourself even when others don't, that's the beginning of freedom. Over the next chapters, we'll explore 7 difficult but profoundly healing methods to break free from the patterns that keep you unseen. These aren't quick fixes. They require courage, but they lead to something more valuable than praise. They lead you back to yourself. Rejection is obvious. It has sharp edges, a slammed door, a bitter word, a betrayal. We know it when we see it, and it stings. But emotional abandonment, that's harder to name. It's quiet. It hides inside relationships that look normal on the outside. It lives in the space between what is said and what is felt. You can be married and emotionally abandoned. You can be praised at work and still feel like a ghost. You can be surrounded by people and still feel utterly alone. Dr. Gabor Maté explains this phenomenon with clarity. Trauma is not what happens to you. Trauma is what happens inside you as a result of what happens to you. So I assume when your emotional needs are consistently ignored, minimized or unseen, and especially as a child, your nervous system adapts. You stop asking, you stop expecting, you learn to disconnect from your own needs just to survive. And here's the cruel irony. As adults, many of us continue these same patterns. We minimize ourselves. We tolerate the bare minimum of affection or recognition. We confuse being useful with being loved. Why? Because once upon a time, we had to choose between authenticity and attachment. We chose attachment, we had to. We learned that being fully ourselves, with needs, feelings, opinions, was risky. It could cost us connection. So we became who we thought we needed to be to earn love. The helper, the achiever, the fixer, the peacemaker. And slowly, we disappeared. That's the wound. Not the loud moments of rejection, but the lifelong ache of not being emotionally held, not even by ourselves. If this resonates, it's not because something is wrong with you, it's because your pain is valid, and the story of your invisibility has roots. But here's the good news. What was learned for survival can be unlearned for healing. And healing begins not with demanding appreciation from others, but by finally acknowledging where you've been abandoned, especially by the parts of yourself you had to silence to be accepted. This awareness isn't comfortable, but it is the first door now back to your truth. You say yes when every part of you wants to say no. You smile even when you're exhausted. You check in on everyone, but no one checks in on you. Sound familiar? This is the people-pleasing trap, and it doesn't come from weakness, it comes from deep unhealed survival instincts. Dr. Gabor Maté often speaks about the tragic wisdom of the child who learns to please in order to stay safe. He says, When we are young, we have two basic needs, attachment and authenticity. But when being authentic threatens attachment, we sacrifice authenticity. As children, we couldn't risk losing connection, even if that connection was inconsistent, cold, or conditional. So we adapted. We became who they needed us to be: quiet, helpful, low maintenance, emotionally attuned to others, and disconnected from ourselves. But that strategy, once useful, becomes a prison in adulthood. People-pleasing seems noble, kind, selfless, but underneath it lives a silent question: will I still be loved if I stop performing? And that's the cost. To be loved for a role, not for your soul. To be needed, but never nurtured. To be praised, but never protected. You become a character in other people's lives, and dependable, agreeable, available, while your own life slowly slips away. And what's worse, over time, you may forget what your real needs even are. You stop asking, what do I want? What do I feel? What do I need right now? Because the focus has always been, how do I keep others happy? This isn't selfishness, this is self-rescue. To stop people-pleasing is to risk discomfort, maybe even disapproval. But it is the only path back to authenticity. And here's a truth you may need to hear today. Not everyone will like the real you, but the real you is worth being loved, even if only by a few, especially by yourself. When you begin to step out of this pattern, you may feel guilty. That's not a sign you're doing something wrong, that's a sign you're healing. Next, we begin the 7 hard but healing methods, starting with the one that feels harsh, but sets you free. There's a certain moment, quiet but life-altering, when you realize you've been negotiating your dignity, not for money, not for survival, but for something even more fragile: affection, attention, a sense that you matter. It happens slowly. You accept the bare minimum. You laugh at jokes that belittle you. You tolerate coldness, indifference, even disrespect, just to keep a connection alive. And you tell yourself, at least I'm not alone. But Gabor Maté would ask, at what cost? What parts of yourself did you have to silence to stay connected? This isn't about blame. It's about waking up. Because here's the truth most people avoid. If you have to betray yourself to be loved, it's not love. We've been taught to believe that relationships are about compromise, but there's a difference between compromise and self-erasure. Compromise says, we both adjust. Self-erasure says, I'll become whatever you need me to be, just don't leave me. That's not intimacy, that's survival. It often comes from childhood wounds, when love was conditional, when affection was earned through performance, obedience, or silence. So as adults, we repeat the pattern. We tolerate crumbs because deep down we don't believe we deserve the feast. But something sacred is lost in this bargain: your dignity. The quiet inner knowing that says, I am worthy of respect, even when I'm flawed, even when I'm misunderstood. Reclaiming that dignity is not about demanding more from others. It's about no longer abandoning yourself in the hope that someone else won't abandon you. It's saying, I won't stay where I am merely tolerated. I will no longer beg for connection that costs me my soul. I am done mistaking emotional scraps for love. This method is difficult because it may mean walking away from relationships, from roles, from patterns that once made you feel safe. But here's what you'll find on the other side: peace, power, self-respect. Not the loud kind that comes from external praise, but the quiet kind that lets you sleep at night, knowing you no longer betray yourself just to belong. And that is the beginning of a different kind of love. Loneliness has a sound, not the absence of noise, but the absence of being felt. You can live in a house full of people, attend meetings, make small talk all day, and still feel profoundly alone. Why? Because the loneliness that hurts most is not physical, it's emotional. It's not about who's around you, it's about who sees you. Dr. Gabor Maté says, we are biopsychosocial creatures. Connection is not a luxury. It is a need as basic as food and water. But many of us fear loneliness so deeply, we stay in places that hurt us, just to avoid it. We stay in dry marriages, in draining friendships, in workplaces that deplete us, not because they nourish us, but because they distract us from the void. We scroll, we numb, we overcommit, we keep busy. But deep down, we are running from a silence that terrifies us, the silence of being alone with ourselves. And yet, that very silence holds your healing. Because here's the paradox: loneliness can't be healed by others. It must first be faced within. You can't connect deeply with someone else if you're still disconnected from yourself. And self-connection requires stillness, attention, honesty. Ask yourself, when was the last time I sat with my own pain without trying to fix it? When was the last time I let myself cry, not in secret, but in full presence with myself? What have I been avoiding feeling by staying surrounded, overstimulated, overcommitted? This method is hard because it's counterintuitive. We think we need more people, more love, more validation. But often, we need fewer distractions and more courage to sit with the ache. And when you do, something shifts. You start to hear the voice beneath the noise, the one that's been waiting patiently, whispering, "I miss you." That voice is yours. Facing your loneliness isn't the end. It's the sacred beginning of becoming someone who no longer needs to beg for connection because you've finally come home to yourself. There are words inside you that have never been spoken, not because you didn't want to speak them, but because you were afraid of what might happen if you did. Would they leave? Would they laugh? Would they say you're too much? So you swallowed your truth, again and again, until silence became your safety, and your voice, your real voice, became a stranger. Gabor Maté often reminds us, when we suppress our emotions to maintain attachments, we don't just lose the relationship to others, we lose the relationship to ourselves. Think about that. What have you never said because you feared it would cost you love? I'm hurt. I feel invisible in this relationship. I don't want to live like this anymore. I need you to see me. I matter too. These words seem simple, but to speak them is terrifying because they carry the weight of truth. And truth, once spoken, changes everything. But here's what's even more terrifying: living your entire life in a performance and never being known. What's the point of being liked if the person they like isn't really you? Your silence may have protected you once, but now it's the cage. And every time you avoid saying what you truly feel, you reinforce the belief that your truth is too much, that your needs are a burden, that love must be earned by staying small. That's a lie. Your truth may make others uncomfortable. It may cause friction, even distance, but it also makes real intimacy possible, because intimacy isn't built on perfection. It's built on honesty, vulnerability, the willingness to be seen, and that begins with speaking. Speak trembling. Speak uncertain. Speak anyway. You're not doing it to control how others respond. You're doing it to honor yourself. Even if they don't understand, even if they turn away, you heard yourself. You stood by your truth. You came back to life. And that is more powerful than approval. There's a subtle exhaustion that creeps in over time, not from doing too much, but from doing what no longer feels true. You wake up already tired. You say yes before your body can protest. You show up for everyone, but yourself. And somewhere along the way, the line between care and obligation disappears. Gabor Maté has a name for this: compulsive self-sacrifice. He says, the question is not, do you care for others? The question is, at what cost to yourself? It's noble to be generous, but when generosity becomes your identity, when you're always giving, always fixing, always showing up, even when your tank is empty, you're not serving love anymore. You're serving fear. Fear of being seen as selfish, fear of disappointing others, fear of losing connection if you stop performing. And that fear is costly, because every time you override your inner truth in the name of being responsible, you teach your nervous system that your needs don't matter. You reinforce the idea that love must be earned through sacrifice. But here's a quiet revolution. Start noticing what feels like obligation and question it. Ask yourself, if I stopped doing this, would I still feel worthy? Am I doing this out of love and or fear of conflict? What would happen if I let this go, even if others disapprove? This is not about becoming selfish, it's about becoming honest. Because the truth is, real love does not require self-abandonment. What does require it? Codependency, perfectionism, people-pleasing, conditioning. When you start living from alignment, not duty, your energy changes. You move from resentment to peace, from burnout to boundaries, from performance to presence. And yes, some people won't like the shift. They've grown used to the version of you who overextends, who stays silent, who never asks for anything. But that's not your problem to manage. Your soul is not here to be a machine. You are not a function. You are a living, breathing human being with limits, with longings, with a right to joy. Honor that, and let what's real remain. After years or decades of living to please, to prove, to protect others from your truth, you may find yourself unanchored. You've lost the inner compass, that quiet voice inside that says, "This is right for me. This is who I really am." To find your way back, you don't need more opinions. You don't need more applause. You need to rebuild the connection with the most important person in your life, yourself. Here are 3 methods to help you begin. No is a boundary, a declaration, a doorway back to your own energy. But if you were raised to believe that your worth comes from being agreeable, easygoing, or endlessly available, then saying no can feel like a betrayal. Gabor Maté teaches that suppressed anger and repressed boundaries are linked to physical illness. He says, when you don't know how to say no, your body will eventually say it for you, and it does, through chronic fatigue, anxiety, pain. Your body remembers every time you overrode your truth. So the next time guilt rises after saying no, remind yourself, guilt is not a moral compass. It's often a sign of outdated conditioning. Saying no to others is sometimes the deepest yes to yourself. People who love you don't need you to suffer to feel secure. Your no is sacred. Use it. Let go of being the version of yourself that keeps others comfortable. You weren't born to fulfill other people's expectations. You were born to be whole, not convenient. Disappointing others is inevitable, but abandoning yourself to avoid it is a slow death. You may lose some connections, but what you gain is more profound. The ability to breathe fully in your own presence, the end of the performance, the beginning of peace. Your job is not to be understood by everyone. Your job is to be true to who you've become. Perhaps the most radical act of healing is this, to see your own worth, without needing anyone else to confirm it. Not because you're perfect, but because you're human, because you've lived, because you've endured, because you're still here even after everything. You don't need a cheerleader. You don't need applause. You need to sit with yourself and say, I am not invisible. I am not what I do for others. I am not only worthy when I'm useful. I am enough even in stillness. This is not ego. This is soul recovery. When you rebuild your inner compass, something shifts. You stop waiting to be chosen. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop begging for crumbs. You walk away from what drains you. You gravitate toward what feels like truth. You become whole again, not because the world changed, but because you finally stopped outsourcing your worth. Somewhere along the way, you may have learned that love had to be earned, through sacrifice, through silence, through perfection. You learned to anticipate others' needs and ignore your own. You gave. You stayed. You adapted. And yet still, no one really saw you. But here's what you must remember now. You don't have to scream to deserve love. You don't have to prove your worth through exhaustion. You don't have to shrink just to fit inside someone else's comfort. The 7 methods we've explored aren't easy. They challenge decades of conditioning. They ask you to sit with discomfort, to let go of familiar roles, to feel what's long been buried. But they also offer something priceless, your return to yourself. When you stop betraying your truth in order to be appreciated, something incredible happens. Even if the world around you doesn't change, you do. You become more honest, more discerning, less available to what drains you, and more devoted to what nourishes you. You start choosing relationships where you're not just needed, but seen. Not just tolerated, but valued. You stop asking, why don't they appreciate me? And you start asking, why have I kept myself in places where I'm not appreciated? That question changes everything. And in its wake, you begin to rebuild your life, not around fear, but around truth, not around approval, but around dignity. So here's where we leave you for now. Speak the words you've buried. Say no when your body screams yes for peace. Rest when you're tired, not when everything is done. Stop apologizing for your needs. Trust that love, real love, will never require you to disappear. You were never meant to earn love by disappearing. You were meant to be loved by being exactly who you are. No more pretending, no more waiting, no more crumbs. You are the one you've been waiting for. Welcome home.